She really thinks she belongs here. The laughter comes fast, sharp, and public as a black teenage girl stands outside an elite country club, holding documents no one wants to read. A wealthy man mocks her claim, strangers pull out their phones, and security begins to close in. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't run. She just stands there, insisting on the truth while everyone around her decides she must be lying. What happens when the truth is spoken clearly, but your face convinces people it can't possibly be real? Comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And subscribe for more powerful stories where truth and justice collide. Iana Richardson's life was quiet by design. She woke up before sunrise in a modest apartment she shared with her grandmother, Evelyn, the kind of place where every sound carried and every morning followed the same careful rhythm. School came first, work came after. Responsibility filled the space where childhood was supposed to be. She didn't complain, she didn't explain, she just kept going. At Riverside Academy, she was known as the scholarship student, the one who arrived on the bus while others stepped out of luxury cars. Teachers admired her discipline. Classmates respected her intelligence, even if they never fully understood her. Iana stayed focused, aware that being noticed for the wrong reason could cost her everything she'd worked for. She dressed simply, spoke carefully, and carried herself with a calm that came from growing up too fast. What no one at school knew was her real story. Not Madison Carter, not her teachers, not even the people who smiled politely at her every day. The truth lived in paperwork, legal files, and a worn leather portfolio she never let out of her sight. A family legacy tied to power, ownership, and a country club most people assumed no longer had any connection to her name. Years earlier, after losing both her parents, James Richardson II and Linda Richardson, everything changed. Lawyers arrived, trusts were discussed, decisions were made quietly. Evelyn insisted they live simply away from attention. "Let the world see who you are before it sees what you own," she told her, and Iana listened. Most days that hidden truth stayed buried, until the letter arrived. An official notice from the club, formal, urgent, and impossible to ignore. An emergency board meeting, restructuring. Attendance required from a Richardson representative. The name printed clearly on the page felt heavier than it should have. Iana read it twice, then looked up at her grandmother, already sensing what was at stake. That morning she prepared carefully, documents checked, times confirmed. Portfolio secured. She wasn't going there to argue. She wasn't going there to impress anyone. She was going because her grandfather, James Richardson Sr., had built something that was now at risk of being erased. As the bus carried her toward the club, Iana had no way of knowing that the moment she stepped through those gates, her life would be divided into before and after, and that telling the truth would be the most dangerous thing she could do. The moment Iana Richardson stepped off the bus near the club, she could feel it, the shift. The air itself seemed different. Streets were quieter, cleaner, guarded by stone walls and iron gates that signaled exclusion without saying a word. She adjusted the strap of her bag and tightened her grip on the leather portfolio. Inside it was everything they would doubt, everything she would need. The country club rose ahead like a fortress of old wealth. White columns, manicured gardens, luxury cars pulling into the circular drive as valets moved with effortless precision. It was a place built to impress and intimidate at the same time. Iana walked toward the entrance calmly, rehearsing nothing, prepared for everything. At the door, a uniformed guard looked her over, slowly, carefully. When she stated she was there for the 2 o'clock board meeting, his expression shifted from routine to confusion, then to suspicion. He checked his list again as if her name didn't belong in a space like this. Before he could respond, laughter cut through the moment. Richard Whitmore stepped out from the club entrance, drink in hand, surrounded by familiar faces. He stopped mid-conversation, eyes landing on Iana. His amusement was instant and public. "She says she's a Richardson," he said loudly, turning to the others. "That's a new one." Phones appeared, smiles spread. Patricia Whitmore joined him, her gaze slow and dismissive as it swept over Iana. Chad Morrison edged closer, curiosity mixed with mockery. What could have been verified quietly became entertainment. Iana spoke evenly, introducing herself, explaining why she was there. She reached for her documents, but Richard moved faster, snatching the folder from her hands and holding it up like a joke. "Fake papers," he scoffed. "Anyone can print these." The crowd laughed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply insisted on the truth. That seemed to irritate him more. Words like fraud and trespassing started being thrown around casually as if they were harmless. Patricia filmed openly now, already shaping a story that painted Iana as a threat instead of a person. Security stiffened. The tone changed. When Iana mentioned the family attorney, Lawrence Carter, it only fueled the ridicule. Her calm was treated as arrogance, her composure as deception. Every attempt to explain made things worse, not better. The assumption had already been made. Then the police were called. As the cruisers pulled up, the balance of power disappeared completely. Officer Brad Kelly listened to Richard first. Officer Sarah Carter glanced at the documents but hesitated, unsure. The explanation had already been framed. Iana was no longer a guest or a claimant. She was a problem. "I'm telling the truth," Iana said quietly. It didn't matter. The cuffs closed around her wrists. The sound was sharp and final. Phones zoomed in. The crowd leaned closer. Inside the club, doors shut as the board meeting began without her. Upstairs, a chair marked Richardson sat empty while votes prepared to move forward. Outside, Harold Whitfield pushed through the gathering slowly, leaning on his cane. He didn't laugh. He didn't record. He stared at the police car, then at Iana. Something about her unsettled him, not suspicion, but recognition. "What's her name?" he asked. When he heard it, his face changed. Inside the boardroom, Victoria Ashford checked the clock. The Richardson seat was still empty. Against pressure from Thomas Drake and Helen Cartwright, she insisted they wait. Something felt wrong. Outside, Harold stepped closer to the car, eyes narrowing as memory and reality collided. And in that moment, while the meeting hung in limbo and the crowd grew uneasy, everything was on the verge of unraveling in a way no one had planned for. Time seemed to slow as Iana sat in the back of the patrol car, her hands cuffed tightly in front of her. The metal pressed into her wrists, a sharp reminder of how quickly truth could be turned into suspicion. Through the window, she watched the crowd, people who had laughed minutes earlier now whispering, unsure of what they were witnessing. Phones were still raised, recording every second, but the energy had shifted. Confidence was giving way to discomfort. Harold Whitfield stepped closer, leaning heavily on his cane. His eyes never left Iana's face. The longer he looked, the more unsettled he became. This wasn't the look of a criminal. It was the look of someone enduring something deeply wrong. "What did you say her name was?" he asked again, his voice firm despite his age. When the answer came, Harold went still. Memories surfaced all at once, long meetings, hard arguments, and one man who had fought relentlessly to belong. James Richardson Sr., a founder, a visionary, a man Harold had known well, and a little girl he remembered being shown photographs of years ago. "This doesn't feel right," Harold said quietly. Officer Sarah Carter hesitated as Harold explained what he remembered. The details were too specific to ignore. A family mark, a birthmark Harold had been told about decades earlier, passed down through generations. Proof no document could fake. Reluctantly, the officer leaned closer to the car and gently moved Iana's hair aside. There it was. The reaction was immediate. Sarah's expression changed. Officer Brad Kelly stepped forward, certainty draining from his face. The crowd leaned in, silence spreading as realization replaced mockery. Inside the club, the board meeting had reached a critical point. Thomas Drake pushed for the vote to proceed. Helen Cartwright nodded in agreement, but Victoria Ashford checked the security feed one last time and froze. On the screen was the scene unfolding outside. The police car, the crowd. The girl in handcuffs. Victoria stood so fast her chair scraped loudly across the floor. "Stop everything," she said. The room fell silent as she left without waiting for permission. Outside, the handcuffs were unlocked. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly, avoiding Iana's eyes. Moments later, Victoria arrived, breathless, her face pale with shock. She didn't look at Richard Whitmore at first. She went straight to Iana. "Oh my God," she whispered. "We were wrong." Before anyone could respond, Lawrence Carter's car pulled into the drive. He stepped out with purpose, documents in hand, his presence commanding instant attention. The truth was laid out clearly this time, certified records, ownership, undeniable proof. Richard tried to speak. No one listened. Victoria turned to him, her voice steady and final. "You're suspended." Effective immediately. The crowd began to disperse, the spectacle over. What remained was silence and accountability. Iana walked back toward the entrance, no longer escorted by police, but guided by the weight of her family's legacy. Inside the boardroom, a single chair waited. The nameplate read Richardson. As she sat down, the dust wiped clean. One truth echoed through the room and far beyond it. The moment meant to erase her had instead exposed everything. The boardroom didn't erupt in celebration. There was no applause, no relief-filled smiles. Only a heavy silence settled over the room as everyone came to terms with how close they had come to erasing the truth. Iana Richardson sat quietly in her seat, hands folded, eyes steady. She had been proven right, but the cost of being believed was still written on her wrists. Richard Whitmore's power unraveled quickly after that. His suspension was immediate. The authority he once wielded so casually vanished in front of the same people who had laughed beside him earlier. Patricia Whitmore avoided eye contact. Chad Morrison stood frozen, realizing too late that silence had made him complicit. Outside, the crowd thinned, leaving behind shame where entertainment had once lived. For Ayanna, the meeting ended, but the moment didn't. Being handcuffed in public, accused without proof, dismissed without listening, those memories didn't disappear just because the truth finally surfaced. They stayed with her, not as weakness, but as reminders. Reminders of how easily power can abuse assumptions, how often the truth is doubted when it comes from the wrong person. The club began damage control almost immediately. Investigations were launched, decisions reversed, apologies offered. But apologies could never undo the moment she stood alone at the gate, telling the truth while no one believed her. Still, something had changed. By choosing not to walk away, Iyanna forced a reckoning. Not just for the people in that courtyard, but for everyone watching. Her calm resistance exposed a system that didn't fail by accident but by habit. A system where racism doesn't always shout. It laughs, doubts, and calls authority instead of asking questions. This wasn't just her story. It was the story of countless people judged before being heard, of truth dismissed because it didn't match expectations, of dignity tested in public while others watched in silence. And that leaves us with a question we can't ignore. When someone tells you who they are, and it challenges what you believe, will you listen, or will you decide they're lying before they finish speaking? Because the truth doesn't need permission. It only needs someone willing to pause and believe it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our community's fight to be seen. And don't forget to hit the like button. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.